Welcome to an Elevate Lane County Working Wednesday webinar. My name is Lizzie Gray, and I'm the project coordinator for Connected Lane County. And today we are talking with Rebecca Sprinson about public speaking, a skill that we should have in school life, work life, and just life. So I'm joined right now by Rebecca. Rebecca, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm so happy to be here. It's great to be connected with Connected Lane County, and I'm so excited about all of the content that the team has been producing, so I'm really happy to be able to contribute. I currently work at the business school at the University of Oregon, where I help design new programs to help students get engaged with career planning. So really, my job is to think of like the wildest and weirdest and coolest ways I can help students plan for their life after college graduation, which is really fun.
Yeah.
So I do that. I've also directed a nonprofit in Eugene. I've worked in biotech, and the newest line on my resume is I just got certified to be a fitness instructor, which is a whole new realm of public speaking, because even though I love like using my hands and moving my body when I talk, it is totally different when you're doing that to music with weights. So for anyone who's up for like to level up in public speaking, that's my challenge to you.
That's the next level. I love it. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go for it. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're totally fine. So while Rebecca leads us through her webinar, please be thinking of any questions that come up for you and throw them into the chat box. I'll be monitoring that and asking Rebecca at the end of her presentation. So just let the questions flow. Alrighty, Rebecca, why don't you go for it?
Great. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully.
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome.
And Lizzie, is there a way that I can see you?
Can you not see me?
I can't at the moment, no.
Let me see.
And I'm sorry for asking. I was able to earlier when we tested this.
Huh. Let me try. I can't pin my video. Oh, you want to give it one more go?
Sure. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, you're fine. It's funny. Sometimes I've noticed that it does that. Nothing? Anything?
Oh, I see this little message in the corner. It's fine. We're just going to roll with it, and I'm going to pretend like I can see myself, which is obviously the most important part, so don't worry about it.
Okay, awesome.
So can we dive in?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So I want to first say that this is the high point of my PowerPoint skills that you'll see here. So I want to point out a couple things that this picture captures about public speaking that are important for you to know. First off, I don't actually have three hands. It looks like I do.
Oh my gosh.
Could be really useful in a public speaking environment, but there is a person hidden behind me with like a slightly larger hand. So just so you know, I only have two hands. And I manage still to be a decent public speaker with only those hands. The other thing that I want to point out is my face. You can hopefully see my actual face right now, and I look like a pretty happy person, but this is like a whole new level of excitement and joy written on that photo, and that's because I love public speaking. I used to describe it as my drug of choice. I have stopped using that phrase, but I think it still holds true, and that's why I really am happy to be here talking about it, because I think it's one of those things that people describe as one of their number one fears in life, right? And so to be able to share a little piece of my joy about it is really exciting for me. So this is really going to take you through a few ideas about public speaking that I think are important. They might not match what you would read online, like how do I become a good public speaker? But this is from my perspective, okay?
Very cool.
So here are a couple things that we're going to talk about today. First, why does it even matter that we think about public speaking or talk about it or learn about it? Why is it any different from what we do on a day-to-day basis with our friends or coworkers? So where does that switch flip to be public speaking, and why is it something different? The most important idea that I want to talk about is why you matter exactly as you are as a public speaker, and how to be your authentic self in front of an audience. That's, to me, the most important thing that makes me successful. I totally am myself, good and bad, and all I've done is sort of learn how to roll with my own punches that I throw at myself during public speaking. Things about public speaking that have nothing to do with actually talking, right? So talking, the sounds coming out of my mouth, but there's so many other things that we can do both to make ourselves feel more comfortable and confident, and to actually be better public speakers that don't have to do with producing words. I want to talk about a couple different styles of preparing. This is, I think, a place where people fall into really different categories, and there's no wrong way per se, but there are things to consider with both styles. And then I think the thing that scares people the most is they've given a presentation and they're taking questions from the audience, and someone asks them something that they haven't prepared for. And you have that like deer in the headlights, person on the train tracks, like, what is going to happen to me moment. Everything freezes, the blood drains out of your feet, you fall to the floor. We're going to talk about how to deal with that unknown and how to sort of build ways to support yourself through that moment to be successful. Let me tell you what we're not going to talk about, and that's making attractive PowerPoints. That's not my skill set, sadly. Somebody else should definitely do a talk on attractive and dynamic PowerPoints, but hopefully the sheer power of my personality and words is enough to carry us through without a really gorgeous PowerPoint. So why should we care about public speaking? First off, it's widely acknowledged that it is one of those things that scares people more than, say, going to the dentist, which we were talking about earlier. It is among the top fears that Americans face, which is pretty wild because there's plenty of things to be afraid of that are actually harmful or scary or pain-inducing, and what we're most afraid of is putting ourselves in front of people we may or may not know and talking about something either we care about or don't care about, doing it in a professional way. But it is one of the big fears, and that alone is a great reason why we should care about it and why we should think about it. There are obviously other really critical, pivotal moments in life that are sort of make or break public speaking moments. And I would count things like job interviews, especially panel interviews where there are multiple people interviewing you, as one of those examples. Class presentations, I would guess that a lot of you watching have actually done presentations and can count that as public speaking experience, which is awesome. There might be political or social causes that you really care about, and one of the most impactful ways you can make a difference is by sharing your voice on topics like that, and that can often involve putting yourself in front of a group to speak. And then some other things that I wanted to throw in here as well. So I was thinking about how often, if you're working in a group, maybe on a group project, or even in a colleague setting in an office, working through conflict in a meeting is a really great place where you can use public speaking skills. And I think maybe we can illustrate that as we go through the rest of this seminar together. Other things like asking for support. So I used to be a fundraiser, and that is something you might only do with one or two people watching you, or you might do with a big room watching you as the audience. And being able to summon certain poise and skills and your authentic true self to come to the table in that moment to ask for support, whether it's fundraising or lobbying, as I mentioned before, or voting for particular issues. And then a couple other thoughts that I had, which is that sometimes I think I use my public speaking skills in friend circles or in relationships because I know how to be persuasive. I know how to engage using eye contact or my facial expressions. And those are things that we often hone when we're doing public speaking that can actually really translate into situations that aren't technically public speaking. They're private speaking, but those skills can be really impactful there as well. And then finally, and this is something I'm really passionate about, both in my sort of personal, informal life and professionally, public speaking gives us the chance to share stories that matter. And they might be our own stories, they might be someone else's stories, but that is such a tremendous way to build connection with both people you know and don't know. It's a way to create change, both in your own life and in social groups and in our communities. And it's a way, I think, to celebrate the diversity of voices that should be at every table. And so public speaking is a way that we can elevate those voices, that we can share our own stories, and that we can listen to others. And so that's another reason why I think it's so important to care about public speaking. So I want to pause for a minute, since we did start by talking about fear, and ask any participants to chat in about what particular elements of public speaking are particularly scary for them. And while people are chatting in, I'll just share my own personal one, which is very this COVID-19 moment, which is I get very focused on looking at my own face in the camera and watching my mouth. And like, is it making the right shape? Is it normal? Is something wrong with my lip? I don't know. So I can't see myself right now. It's a mixed blessing. But I'm just sharing that because we all have fears, and that is like Zoom public speaking fear.
Oh, that is so funny.
Yeah.
That is so funny.
Really bad too. Like I've spent a lot of time looking at my own face in the last couple months.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone's chatting anything in. I'm going to take a sip of LaCroix, not yet a sponsor of Connected Lane County, but they should.
We're working on it. Don't worry. I can share mine. It looks like a few students have typed in, but I think
Awesome.
about how different public speaking for my job feels. And so I always get intimidated at the thought of presenting material to a group of professionals. It feels totally different than speaking to students or even educators sometimes about the work that we do. So the thought of getting up in front of a room full of articulate, polished professionals and delivering content intimidates the heck out of me.
Okay, that's such a great fear to share. Thank you, Lizzie.
Of course.
We'll actually address that like right off the bat. So.
Oh, perfect. It's as if I looked ahead. I'm just
It's
kidding. I really
almost
didn't.
like
I promise. So we have we
Yeah.
have one student who says, stumbling over my words. I have a mild stutter.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And again, I think one of the really early slides, we're going to talk about authenticity a little bit. And you're not alone. We all definitely are not perfectly articulate speakers. I think, of course, there's going to be a difference experienced if you have a mild stutter, and like, I honor that reality for you, and I don't want to downplay it. But I think we'll talk a little bit about how to be real with yourself. So thank you for sharing that.
That's great. One just says blanking, which I assume just means getting up there and forgetting everything you've prepared.
Yes, and we will talk, I think that we'll address that towards the end when we talk about like preparing for the unknown, which basically is the same thing. I will share that I was presenting in front of a class of like 200 business students earlier this term, and actually in winter term. And let me tell you that undergraduate students right now are not necessarily the most like friendly faces. They're not like, yes, I'm so excited to listen to you. Like, look at my engagement. They're like, I'm looking at my phone and boring. And I was like really struggling with the mic that sat in my pocket. And I just like, all the content just like drained out of me, you know? So I've been there is what I'm Okay, so these are all like such real, normal concerns to have, and concerns that obviously, as I've shared, I've faced. So we're gonna totally get to them. So the very first thing that I want to say, and if you leave this webinar with remembering nothing else but this is the most important thing, which is, what is your story? Why do you matter? And you matter so deeply, fundamentally, without question. Your opinions matter, your experiences matter, your agency, which means the choices that you've made or can make to sort of drive the direction of your own life, all of those things are fundamentally full of matter and importance. And I don't think we tell each other this often enough, and this might seem like it's really out of place in a webinar about public speaking, but the reality is, I think if you can sort of file that away, that this person told you that your voice and opinion and experiences matter, put it in the little pocket in your heart, and remember that when you go forward to share information or a story with the world. I think it can give you just a sense that you deserve to stand there or sit there in front of people and to be heard, because you do. And you might think that you are really boring or not articulate or not professional enough, as Lizzie shared. But the reality is, first off, there will always be someone who is more professional or articulate or interesting than you, but they are only as valuable as they are because you exist as well. And my story only matters because your story exists too. So when you are standing there in front of people and you feel like, why have I been asked to speak about this? There's someone who's more expert than me. I have no idea what I'm going to say. I don't feel prepared enough. That's okay, because you matter and your voice deserves to be heard. So this is a question that we don't actually have to answer, but it's just one that I wanted to pose for you as food for thought at the bottom of the slide, because I think this is a really helpful exercise if you ever want to sort of practice public speaking a little bit more, which is to think of a story about your life, something that you've experienced that you would share with an audience to help them understand who you are. And it doesn't have to be like something deep and dark and traumatic. Like, I would share an experience about a time that I was traveling in Indonesia, and I was stuck on a freeway and hilarity ensued, and it's all fine, it worked out. But like, that would be my story. And I think it would tell people things about me. And it reminds me like, oh, I have experiences to share that are valuable. So I just want to encourage you, if it's something that you feel like you don't matter, you're not good enough, you're wrong, and to try to think about stories that really illustrate like the meat of your life, and use those to sort of build a foundation for yourself that allows you to build confidence about public speaking. Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense.
Okay.
Yep.
So think about that story, Lizzie, because you have a great story, and that makes you worthy as a professional to speak amongst other professionals. So
thank you.
Try to hold on to that. So now that we've gotten that like deep therapeutic stuff out of the way, I want to talk a little bit more about sort of that thing of authenticity. Who are you in front of an audience? And so I put on one side of this, like, how you think you are. These might be words that you use to describe yourself, like, oh, I'm really silly, I'm really shy, I'm awkward, or I'm really serious, I'm really bad at making PowerPoints. And then what I want you to do is think of some of those adjectives that you might use to describe yourself, and then think about how you could reframe them for a public speaking environment to give you confidence that those qualities are things that are perfectly meaningful and valuable in that context. So if you're someone who is really silly, that can make you an incredibly like funny and surprising presenter or public speaker, where the audience very quickly comes to know like, oh, I don't know what to expect from this person, so I'm going to hang on their every word. If you're quite shy, then you have the opportunity to engage with people when you speak publicly and to demonstrate that likely you are quite thoughtful, and that even if you take time to process what people are saying as feedback or asking questions or in a dialogue, that shyness gives also space for other people to engage with you and to have a conversation with you and to participate and to have a seat at the table. So that's one way that I might try to reframe that as well. If you think that you're really awkward, welcome to the club. Everybody, I think, thinks that to some degree about themselves, and that just fundamentally makes us all very relatable. So it is, I think it's so universal that acknowledging it and just being that person who likely isn't that awkward to begin with can make you very relatable. If you think of yourself as really serious and you don't make jokes, really, humor isn't sort of one of the pieces of currency that you trade with often, which is totally fine. You can come across as really believable, and you can import great seriousness to topics that you're speaking about, and that is just as valuable as being silly or clowny. If you're bad at making PowerPoints, the reframe for public speaking is you're still bad at making PowerPoints. That one was for me. So sorry, Rebecca, you lose. But in general, what I want you to do is to think about some of the adjectives that you might use to describe yourself, or even better, think about ones that your friends might use to describe you, because they likely are more generous with you than you are with yourself. And think about how those qualities are ones that could be particularly useful for public speaking, but allow you to be exactly who you are. So I'm pretty silly. I like to crack jokes a lot when I speak publicly. And I've learned if I try to like tamp that down too much, I sort of go off the rails. Like it'll be okay for a little bit, but then it sort of like starts bubbling up, and it will come out in ways that are not ideal. So what works so much better for me is to sort of meet that out in little pieces across my public speaking, so that I'm like constantly getting a little bit of that outlet, instead of just trying to be someone who's totally not me. And so the thought question that I pose here at the bottom, which is again one that you can think about, but if anyone wants to chat in, I'd love to hear thoughts as well, which is, what are some of the risks that you encounter when you try to be someone else or to be unlike your sort of core self in a public speaking setting? So for me, it's like holding that silliness in too much, and then it just explodes in a bad way.
Right.
And you might think I'm making that up, but I'm really not. Like, this is something I've actually worked with a lot to get better with. So, but I think there are a lot of risks that we can encounter when we try to be sort of what we imagine a public speaker should be like, as opposed to ourselves, Rebecca or Lizzie or Christian, while public speaking.
Yeah, a few students actually did type in.
Yeah.
One says, I can get too focused on performing and then lose my train of thought. I was thinking that you might come across as unauthentic.
Totally.
Audience can tell if you are pretending, less likely to be engaged in what you're saying, even if it's super important.
Those are both such great points, which I think capture something that I didn't even think about, which is this idea that being inauthentic in a public speaking environment is not a good experience for the audience, which I'm so glad that people raise that. I think that that just further illustrates how, like, you don't win if you do that. And yes, I have also totally gotten caught up in that performative nature, and just sort of like that takes over in a way that's not actually useful for the information that I'm conveying or for whatever what I'm driving toward. So yes, I think, and I think the other thing that I would just add about any of these sort of potential pitfalls are that it's so normal to encounter them as you start getting comfortable with public speaking and you practice and you have experience with it. And all it takes is sort of continuing to do it to sort of work those things out. Because like I said, I really have worked at like controlling my silly and using it in, the right moments, as opposed to it just sort of overcoming me. And that takes time, it takes practice. But I do think I've gotten better. And so you can get better and you can sort of come to a place where you're more comfortable being truly authentic and using those sort of core skills within you in a way that's like useful and productive. Any other thoughts that people have shared that we should touch on?
One more. I never feel smart when I'm speaking, so I try hard to use stronger language, but it's just not me.
Right. And that's fine. Most Americans, I think, have a pretty strong barometer, and that's like my 5-cent word for this. People who use vocabulary that's not right for the setting. So that's why you so often see in politics or in political campaigning politicians that are very careful to be extremely plain spoken and to use English that's really quite basic. Words, short sentences, not a lot of subclauses. And let me tell you, that's where you can totally get lost as it is, which I am literally illustrating right now by using a subclause. And that was amazing. That worked so well. So, like I have a very strong vocabulary, I will say. And I don't think I really use it that often when I'm speaking publicly because it's not authentic to the idea of quick and easy connection, right? So that's such a great point. Thank you to whoever chatted that in as well. So that's a little bit about like authenticity, which is awesome. I want to talk about something that's really hard to translate over Zoom, but is so important and a place where I think you can actually derive so much strength in public speaking, and that is stuff that has nothing to do with actually talking. And the first is eye contact. So I am obviously experiencing eye contact with my computer right now, which is extremely intimate and, dare I say, romantic, but also really creepy and weird. So in general, when you have the chance to do public speaking, you'll have at least some small group around you. And what you can do is be like, yes, I'm seeing you, man in the blue sweater. And like with the lady with the scarf, like, look at my eyes looking at you. And like, oh, this toddler here, like, I'm connecting with you. And like, Lizzie, and I love her. Like, she looks so engaged. It's so great. And that makes people feel like they matter to you. Someone looks at you for long enough that you can make eye contact, you get the feeling that you are being seen, and being seen is one of the things that we don't get enough of, and is incredibly meaningful, and stokes our ego in exactly the right way, because we all should feel like we matter more than we actually think we do. So eye contact, number one, most important. I was just making eye contact with various cabinets and potted plants in my kitchen. but hopefully in the real world, you can practice that sort of like quick connection and move on to the next person, and or like pretend you're making eye contact with someone, but give yourself a break and zone out like just above them. Also fine. Smiling and varied facial expressions. So the first thing I want to say is that if you are not a naturally smiley person, you do not have to suddenly become like, because that will be terrible. So you don't have to smile when you don't mean it. And many or some topics don't call for smiling, and that's completely fine. And you should trust your sort of emotional tenor about the topic that you're talking about and who you are as a person. Now, there's the very important Tyra Banks smizing, smiling with eyes, which gives you like the soft, approachable look. And frankly, if there's any advice you should take from a supermodel, it's definitely that. So I would practice in a mirror, like bringing the smile from here to here, because again, that invites connection and it invites people to sort of feel like, okay, this person is approachable.
Can I just interject something very quickly?
Please.
There has never been a better time in life to practice smizing because we are wearing masks more than we ever have. And I noticed myself trying to smize at people in the grocery store so they know I am friendly, and it's hard. So you have to practice.
So true. And it's so funny because I have thought about that too. And I feel myself like mega smile. like, am I getting it up there? I don't, you don't have to go like full mask level, but that is, you're right. Like 2020 is the year of the smiles.
Yeah. Oh, well said.
So no better time than to practice that for your future public speaking. Okay. Breathing. First, okay, so I said that if there was one thing you take away from this, it's that you matter and your story matters. Number 2 is breathing. One of my most favorite mentors who brought me up in the world of public speaking told me that fear is excitement without breath. So, and I have carried, like I get chills when I say that to myself because it has like, it is the font of wisdom that I carry with me in public speaking. So when you are afraid, and let's talk about this in a public speaking context, not of like something you should actually be afraid of, breathing, slowing down, taking a breath between sentences. And this sounds weird, but one way that I can actually sort of trick myself into breathing more is I try to breathe like slightly audibly to myself. So I sort of try to make the inhale sound to myself and then an exhale sound, which can you hear it at all, Lizzie?
I can't. I'm also doing it. Can you hear me?
No, exactly.
Okay, great.
So it's not going to sound weird and like Darth Vader-y to other people as long as you are, doing it within reason. But it's a way that you can actually sort of like regulate the intake and exhalation of air. And breathing connects to something that so many people struggle with when it comes to public speaking, which is talking too fast. And if you force yourself to think about breathing either between little phrases or between sentences or between ideas, you can wean yourself off of the need to get everything out really fast because you're super nervous and you just really want it to be over and like get off the never look at anybody in the eyes ever again. So if you breathe, you can actually settle yourself in. And I'm not a doctor, but I know that actually focusing on your breath can calm your nervous system and or other systems. I don't know what they are, science words, and help you like truly regulate yourself into a place that is like calmer and more slow. So breathing, huge. Hands. Some people are not hand talkers. Totally fine. You don't have to try to fake it in order to be a good public speaker. That is not necessary. I hope that looked fake.
It did.
Okay.
Nailed it.
And and some people are natural hand talkers, and just like let those birds go, like let them do the hand things they want to do. I was made fun of for talking with my hands when I was really young in elementary school, and I remember it, and I sat on my hands for years. And I'm really sorry for whoever did that to me, because these birds are ready to fly now. So this goes back to being authentic and embodying your authenticity sort of physically as well, which is like own the body that you're in on stage. And that if you like using your hands, if it feels natural, go for it. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. Like, you can be yourself and not think about your hands moving at all, and that's also fine. Mm-hmm. And moving your hands connects with the idea of moving around the space, which is obviously not something I can do right now unless I pick up my computer and like carry you around my house, but this is the only area that I cleaned, so we're not going to do that. But moving around, if you are on a stage or in front of a classroom, you have probably at least a few feet of play, of space to move. And you can do so much to sort of ground yourself by giving yourself the latitude to take a couple steps in either direction occasionally, which allows you to make eye contact with new people, which allows you to regulate your breath because you're moving a little bit. So move a couple steps to the right, pause, take a breath, and then start your next point. Like, people will hang on it because it's interesting to watch and listen to, and it's not a staccato cadence that just never lets up and it's constantly sounding exactly the same in front of them in the same spot with the same eye contact. If you breathe, give yourself space to breathe in the space and to make eye contact with different people and to take a breath, you sound way more interesting. And then the final piece I want to touch on is visuals, which obviously I have made abundantly clear is not my strength in the PowerPoint realm. But one particular reason I just want to call this out when you're thinking about public speaking is that finally, and we are so far behind on this, this is a really important place to think about accessibility to audiences, to people who may not be able to hear you auditorily, to people who may be processing information more slowly than you're speaking, to people who may just have different learning styles. So incorporating adequate visuals that allow someone to look at a screen, to look at words, to look at a photo, or other ways of communicating your ideas is really important from an accessibility standard, and something that I am absolutely working to do better at in general. And I think it's sort of particularly important if you're in an in-person public speaking environment, but I'm not off the hook for doing this as a webinar. Like, this is the bare minimum, and we should all be pushing ourselves to think about how we can make public speaking opportunities that we have accessible to more audiences. So the question that I want to pose is about breathing, which is how can you trick yourself into breathing more? So I shared my trick, which is to make a slight breathing sound, but you might have your own. So that's something to think about. You don't have to chat in about that, but are there any chats about non-verbal public speaking stuff we should address? Lizzie?
I am watching the chat box. I don't see anything yet. I will say though, I'm so excited that you touched on breathing, because more often than not, I find myself out of breath when I'm speaking, and I'm I didn't just run up 5 flights or 1 flight of stairs.
Or 1.
Yeah, right. We won't talk about number. But I did not run to be here, so I don't understand why I'm out of breath right now. And you're totally right in that you, I think, subconsciously are holding your breath, or just talking so quickly that, or not quickly, but just talking so much that you aren't giving yourself time to breathe.
Well, and something else that I was just observing, which is technically in this situation, I'm the public speaker and you a participant. Mm-hmm. speaking, give yourself the time to actually like take the air in when someone else is talking and like really breathe. Like you get a break then. And I, as a public speaker, should totally exploit that break for my own breathing.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yep, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Also take as needed the LaCroix breaks.
TM. Nothing from the students, so I think we can move on.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, a little bit about preparation. And I'm checking the time quickly. Okay, wow, this is going really fast. So there are many ways to prepare. I'm not saying that there's only 2 ways with this, but there are 2 ways of preparing that are probably operate in tension with one another, there's a dichotomy between them. So one of them is what I will call the lock it down style, and one is what I will call the let it flow style. And you can guess which one I am, maybe. So the lock it down style is one where you're going to take the time to rehearse out loud, preferably even with one or two people that you can use as an audience. You will have notes about each point. You might script in everything from your pauses to jokes to audience interaction. And in order to, I think, use the lock it down method particularly well, one of the key things that's going to set you apart is to use your notes and to use that preparation really carefully. So know how to not rely on reading your notes, but rather that you have rehearsed so much, you can quickly glance at your notes for keywords and you know exactly where to pick up with what your script is for yourself. So you might be memorizing certain passages, and this style is one where you're going to be really careful about knowing exactly what you're going to say for each slide or for each key idea. So that's lock it down. Let it flow is you are going to, hopefully, if you're going to do this well, have a strong sense of what the key ideas are of what you're planning to talk about. And you might spend some time thinking about phrases that stand out to you that sound particularly impactful and when you might be able to use them. And you might think about what types of comments or responses you'll get from an audience. So that's the other style, the let it flow style. I will say, can anyone guess what style I am?
I'm gonna wait for the audience. I have an inkling. Oh, let it flow.
Yes, that's correct. And there are times in my life where I have used a lock it down style, and that has been really important. And I have actually had to, have a stern conversation with myself that this presentation that I have to give during a job interview is one where I better rehearse pretty carefully. And it's time to borrow from the other style. And there have been times when I have been like, let it flow all the way. That is just how I'm going to be comfortable. I don't need to know sort of exactly what I'm going to say at every slide because I know enough how I feel about the topic that I can ad-lib it comfortably. Mm-hmm. There is no right or wrong here, and you can borrow from both styles. I think we tend to romanticize the let it flow style because it seems more like, wow, you don't even have to look at notes. Well, yeah, but I can't look at notes very well. So when I see people who prepare and script and then deliver on that super strongly, I'm like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? Like, that's so impressive to me because it really is like, who knows what's going to happen up there when I go up. So I don't want you to feel like the let it flow style is the way you have to be if you want to be cool. there's so much strength in both styles, and that it really makes sense, particularly like early in your life, to check in and be honest with yourself about what style makes more sense for you. So a couple reflection questions that I just wanted to toss out there. Are there times that you can imagine using one style over the other where, for example, as I shared with a job interview, I really gravitated toward a more lock it down style? Is there one that you like feel in your heart you naturally gravitate towards? And when can you sort of like borrow elements from one to mesh with the see, everyone trips over their words, in order to strengthen your skill? Thoughts about preparation or questions about preparing?
Just someone sharing in response to the reflective questions.
Mm-hmm.
Let it flow works better for me when I have a really strong understanding of a topic, like in school presentations about a general theme like literature. But when the information is really detailed or specific, I generally have to rehearse carefully to make sure I don't give inaccurate information, which, yeah, that feels spot on to me, because I could see someone like kind of ad-libbing, and then you're throwing out false information.
Totally. I mentioned earlier that I worked at a biotech company for a while, and I give presentations about our like genomic medicine technology. And you can probably tell from how I say that phrase that it was not super comfortable for me. And I really had to learn to know exactly what I was saying, as opposed to like letting it flow about genes, because that was not a recipe for success for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I can totally relate to that. Any other comments from the peanut gallery?
That was the one.
Okay. So the final thing, I think the thing that is the scariest to people is what happens when you are confronted with the unknown, specifically with public speaking, but in life too. I totally feel you. So with public speaking, I just threw out on this slide some ways to buy yourself time, because obviously I can't teach you right now how to know the answer to a question that you just like straight up don't know the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can do is practice giving yourself time to figure out how you're going to deal with that. So here are a bunch of them. I love saying to people, that is such a good question. Thank you for asking it. Because right there, you bought yourself a little time, and you're showing them that you're not afraid, even if you are, which is also fine. You can show them that you're afraid, but if you want to project a sense of confidence, you can just say like, great question, thank you. And then you can say, I have no idea. Or I'm really not sure, I've never encountered that, but one thing that I might try would be this. If you are really brave, you can say, that's such a good question. What do you think? Obviously, that depends on the context a little bit. Another thing that people are really afraid to do is to literally acknowledge that they need a sec and to say, you know, let me think about that for a minute. So how I would think about dealing with that, like there's nothing wrong with what I just, frankly, we all probably relished the silence, and you can use that to your advantage, because it actually makes you seem like you're really thinking, number one, even if you're just like, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, in your head. And it shows that you aren't afraid to like take the time to do that, which is great. Like I want to be around and listening to someone who isn't afraid to take time to think. So that's a piece of advice about that. I love it when speakers who clearly don't have like a full answer talk about when they've seen other people be successful with the question. So if someone says like, oh, well, how would you handle this like technical genomic blah, blah, blah. And they're like, that's a really interesting question. And one thing that I read about in this paper was when someone used this polymerase thing, and they're not trying to fake that they have knowledge, but they're showing that they know where to look for knowledge. And then the most important thing is, if you feel that you haven't really fully addressed whatever the question is, to say, can I do some research and get back to you on that? Because I'd love to look into it further before I commit to that answer. Like if someone said that to me, I would be like, yes, do that and get back to me. Like, thank you for not totally faking it. Because you don't have to. Like, I don't expect you to know everything. I don't know everything, not even about public speaking. And it's so much better to just own that, because again, that goes back to being authentic and to building connection with your audience. So those are some of my thoughts about the unknown. Do other people have techniques that they use or questions about dealing with the unknown in public speaking settings?
While we wait, I'll just say that I use the pause and breathe and think for just a second in interviews. I was given that piece of advice a few years ago, and it's been invaluable. And it's not, what's the word I'm looking for? You wouldn't just assume that would be okay. And it is.
Yeah. No, I think we really have to give ourselves explicit permission to do that, which is so sad, because
I know.
Why did we tell ourselves that we had to talk constantly and fill silence and not breathe in order to seem confident?
Right.
It's the exact opposite.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, I think taking a second to think about a question is fine. And most audience members don't have a problem with it, in my experience.
Yeah, totally. And again, it's just about acknowledging like that they're going to have a problem with it. No one is sitting there thinking, why is she doing that?
Right.
Thinking about lunch.
Right.
So I think we have a little time for general questions, not a lot of time. And I'm sorry, I feel like I went a little overboard on content here, but so I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. I threw some questions up here in case people were afraid to ask questions. So yeah. Feel free to ask anything.
So why don't we try to squeeze in 2 questions? It is 1:59. So let's see if any of our audience members have questions. And if not, we can pick 1 or 2 from your list.
Awesome.
And actually, right off the bat, can you answer the, like, what if I get really red or sweat a lot?
Yeah.
Oh, someone else just threw that in the chat box too.
Okay, great. Yeah. So here's what you say to yourself. Oh, wow, I think I'm getting really red. I think my face is flushing. Yep, that's a thing that happens to me. There it is.
Let it go.
So much better than trying to be like, please, God, hold the blood from flowing to my face. I guarantee that won't work, but acknowledging it to yourself, like this is my favorite thing for all anxieties is, oh, I'm feeling this thing that I don't really want to be feeling, and I feel uncomfortable right now. Yep, there it is. And know that like everybody gets that. I'm sure I have like some decent sweaty palms right now.
Yeah.
So it's all good.
1 more question. What do you do if you feel like the audience is zoning out or disengaged?
That is the literal worst, and I hate them for you. I would pause a lot more. I would take some longer pauses, because that is not what people expect to hear. So just from a sound perspective, it sort of tricks them. I would look for any opportunities to throw questions to the audience and to invite participation, particularly not factual answers, but opinions or feelings, because factual answers are boring, opinions and feelings are where it's at anyway. So look for ways to engage them by saying like, what is a time that you've experienced this? Or how do you think it feels when this happens? Because feelings are so much more sort of visceral and immediate. And then I think when you get them started thinking about feelings, they actually start having feelings, and then they're going to be more engaged.
Yeah.
That being said, it sucks, and I'm sorry. And I face it all the time too. And another way to combat this is to be a great audience member yourself.
There you go.
What that looks like.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Okay, last one to end on. When preparing to give a speech or presentation, what are your top 3 tips for making an excellent first impression?
Wow. Okay. Let me pause and think about that. Top 3 for making an excellent first impression.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Not in order.
Okay.
I would say like dazzlingly excellent eye contact is so valuable and something people are afraid to do. So if you can really like give someone that attentive, warm eye contact, you know, give several someones that throughout the room, people feel that. And it's exciting to people to feel that connection with the person on stage. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, introduce yourself strongly. So don't be like, hey, I'm Rebecca, like, here's what I do, but nail that part. And frankly, I didn't think about my introduction at all for this, so I probably didn't nail it, and I'm sorry. But nail it well enough that you sound like you love yourself, you are confident about who you are, you know how to say your own name really crisply. Trust me, that's important. And yeah, so that's number 2. Number 3, oh God. I like it when people surprise me a little bit with what they tell me right off the bat. And I try to do this a bit by saying like, this is a picture of me public speaking, and while it looks like it in this picture, I don't actually have 3 hands. I like it when people can give me a little jolt. And then I'm like, oh, wait, she doesn't have 3 hands? Are you sure? And that's just exciting because it's surprising. So if you can find that thing to weave in, I would go with that.
Awesome. All righty. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time and all the energy you put into this.
It's my pleasure.
Full of content, full of tips, and I know I'm walking away with a lot of new tools in my arsenal for sure.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and ideas as well.
Of course. Alrighty, everyone. Well, next week's webinar is resume building. So join us next week for another webinar and a tour on Tuesday. Alrighty. Bye, everybody.